Okay, let's try this again. Hello, Nation of Immigrants. Thank you and welcome for coming back. It's been a couple of days since I've done this program. I've been a little busy representing some clients and pushing out some asylum applications. But we're back today and we're talking about some headlines that I missed earlier in the week that I wanted to talk about, having to do with the Trump administration's kind of healthcare push. It's part of their public charge initiative to keep poor immigrants out of the country, or so-called poor immigrants out of the country. And so now what we're seeing now is that the inevitable court challenge came, and the healthcare rule or proclamation that had come out of the White House has been overruled. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, along with some other headlines that I thought were interested that are kind of, indirectly related to healthcare and immigration. So we'll talk about that in a bit here on Nation of Immigrants.
You're listening to Nation of Immigrants.
America is a nation of immigrants.
A podcast about U.S. immigration law with your host, Jacob Tingen.
Okay, so like I said, we're going to be talking about this healthcare ruling that came out. We talked about the proclamation when it was first issued back in episode 21. We did mention that this had happened, that the White House had issued this proclamation. The headline I'm reading on the Washington Post: Judge temporarily blocks Trump order requiring would-be immigrants to prove they have health insurance. And so this kind of goes back to another thing that we've talked about, how the Trump administration and people who back kind of his immigration policies, they're fond of saying, oh, I love legal immigration, bring on the legal immigrants. And yet this is one of those things that attacks legal immigration. And Trump in his public comments, and others who support him, have made comments also against, chain migration and family migration, but that's legal immigration. When you've got a family basis for coming into the United States, that immigration is allowed and legal. And so what this ruling what this proclamation was intended to do was essentially just cut off immigration for all but the most wealthy of people from around the world, because health insurance, being able to prove that upon your arrival to the United States, before you get here, that you've already arranged for that. I get that is a good, anybody who's looking to become self-reliant should be looking to get adequate health and life insurance. But that's hardly a requirement, I think, for living here. And it's definitely way beyond the meaning of public charge. We've looked at this. Other judges have looked at this. And that's just not where society falls down on this issue. But anyway, let's take a look at kind of this headline, this article, and see some of the concerns that they've brought up. So the first issue that's kind of, in the article is that this is a temporary restraining order. It's in effect for about a month. The government and the plaintiff's lawyers in this suit are going to have to present evidence in favor of their arguments. So it went into effect a day before this proclamation was supposed to take effect. It's a temporary restraining order. We'll see how it plays out over the next, 30 days or so. So this rule requiring health insurance, so that immigrants show that they're going to have health insurance within 30 days of their arrival in the United States, came from this October proclamation from President Trump. And what it does is it kind of depresses, again, more opportunities for people to come legally to our country. But it also creates a lot of confusion, and as is a frequent theme in the Trump administration's relationship to immigrants who are present here lawfully in the United States, an environment and ambience of just general fear and concern and confusion. So the confusion was felt in a couple of different ways. This article points out that government lawyers who were in charge of implementing this policy were questioning if it was even legal. But then also immigrants and people here in the United States, again, who are related to immigrants, are concerned about running afoul of all of these new and changing public charge rules that are out there. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, the proclamation also required that even those who qualified for a federal tax subsidy to help them buy health insurance on the Obamacare individual market would have to reject that option, although there is no mechanism on the Federal Health Exchange website to do so. I just think that's crazy. They're like, sure, you buy healthcare on the exchange, but you can't use any subsidy that's offered to you. Oh, but by the way, there's no like mechanism or procedure for you to reject that subsidy. Uh, so it's just kind of interesting that this proclamation was issued without any thought as to how it would be implemented. Now, maybe they would say, oh, well, we're going to make it, presumably by the time this goes into effect, that for those who purchase health insurance on the exchange, that there would be an option to choose not to accept the subsidy. But that's not realistic. Obviously, I mean, I haven't heard any news that happened. And it's quite the opposite. The general effect of these policies is just to prevent people from coming to the U.S., not to actually take a deep dive into how are we going to actually accomplish this. And then I think it's also just important to recognize that this rule didn't come out of nothing. It's coming from this whole public charge push, which again, the whole point here is to exclude poorer immigrants from coming to the United States. The idea or justification being like, well, what can they contribute? They're poor. An argument and a philosophy that I reject. And if you've been listening to this, you already know that. So it's interesting kind of what this article has to say about the temporary injunction. It mentions a lot of the different concerns that come up. So, for example, during a conference call in October, officials within the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, raised practical and legal questions about implementing the proclamation. One attorney said, I'm really thinking that in many ways, sticking to the letter of the proclamation will cause us to run afoul of current laws on the books. Now, of course, that agency is denying that statement. But, that's a normal question to ask, I imagine, when you're implementing any new regulation or laws. Like, all right, how are we going to stay legal? And it's appropriate for a lawyer to opine that and say, hey, what are we going to do to solve this? And yet from the administration, we've got this, no, just this kind of hard push. The effects on immigrants are interesting. Every time something like this comes out from the White House administration about public charge or health insurance or these issues, our clients call us concerned, and they need and want to know answers. And unfortunately, with this level of flux, where a proclamation is issued from the White House one day and then it's struck down in a court the next, it's very difficult to know how to advise clients. But we do the best we can by staying on top of the news and by being connected with a lot of organizations that do a lot of good. One of those organizations is the American Immigration Lawyers Association, who is one of the organizations involved in the case that brought about this temporary injunction in this block. So that's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot to say about the case except that it's been blocked. And what's interesting is that we should see news in about a month. So look for another headline on this issue, and we'll talk about it again as it comes up. Now, one of the things that I just can't understand is, I guess I want to use the term ignorance, just kind of, but not in the mean way, just kind of like in the not knowing stuff way. People don't know everything they need to know, right? So I'll use the example of Donald Trump saying that they were going to build a wall in Colorado so that the New Mexicans couldn't get over. Well, it's interesting. There's a headline, CVS rejects Purdue student's Puerto Rican ID, asks for immigration papers to buy cold medicine. First of all, I don't know why you would need immigration papers to buy medicine. CVS employees aren't ICE or affiliated with ICE in any way. I don't understand why any ID wouldn't be sufficient for them. But here's the other issue is that Puerto Rico does not make you an immigrant. People who are born in Puerto Rico, okay, so maybe some people from Puerto Rico consider themselves immigrants, and that's fine. But if you're born in Puerto Rico, you're a U.S. citizen, right? So I just think that that's important to point out. But what's interesting in this article, that what caused this employee to ask him for his visa? Someone wrote in a Facebook post. Was it his accent, his skin color? Was it the Puerto Rican flag on the license? So it's very interesting that this would even happen at all. And it's unclear as to why someone would believe that this was in any way a good idea to ask a Puerto Rican for, excuse me, you need immigration paperwork. Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens. Yeah, it's just kind of mind-boggling to me that this even happened at all. But that's kind of the climate we're in, where people feel emboldened to be like, where are you from? People who perhaps aren't as kind to or kind-hearted towards immigrants as perhaps we should be as a society, might reject services to people who they believe don't merit them by virtue of things like skin color or accent. And that's a shame. That's a shame. So those are two kind of health-related headlines. One is, of course, about this policy for health insurance being blocked. And the other is just kind of this really quirky, random thing that happened in a local pharmacy outside Purdue University. So, yeah, super strange, but hopefully an isolated incident. But unfortunately, as I speak with my clients, they tell me that they do encounter, I don't know if you'd call it racism or nationalism, but bias and prejudice at a lot of turns. And so if you know an immigrant and you're friendly to immigrants, you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, well, we should support legal immigrants and other immigrants as well, especially many who are fleeing harm and violence, extend a helping hand, be kind, and just have a conversation and smile and wish people well on their way. So thanks again for listening to Nation of Immigrants. I hope that you are enjoying the podcast. Again, subscribe on YouTube, follow Facebook, Twitter, and then you can always support the podcast by visiting my website at jacobtingen.com, where I'll continue to be posting information about Nation of Immigrants. We're also going to be kicking off another series of videos and potentially a podcast on other legal issues related to our areas of practice and just kind of our activity in the public sector. So look for more information from me in the future. But we hope to see you around at tingenwilliams.com, on our social media feeds, and of course, donating to help pay for immigrants' legal bills. Thanks for all that you do. Thanks for your follows, for your kind words, for your comments. We'll see you next time here on Nation of Immigrants.
Thank you for listening to Nation of Immigrants.
America is a nation of immigrants.
Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Watch the live stream on YouTube and Facebook, or visit jacobtingen.com to learn more.